And in this regard, I'm very happy that Robert Cooper, our keynote speaker, agreed to join us for our workshop, because there's really, I think, no better practitioner that we could wish for when we talk about European foreign policy cooperation. Perhaps, I think for most of us, Robert Cooper, we know who he is, but just to give you a short impression. So actually, Robert started his career 30 years long in the British Foreign Service. So he was, for example, posted in Tokyo, I checked, also in Bonn. And I found, for example, very interesting that Robert was head of the policy planning unit in the Foreign Commonwealth Office 89 to 93. So that was for me immediately, oh, that's Maastricht. I think very interesting. He was also Deputy Secretary for Defense and Overseas Affairs before becoming the Special Representative for Afghanistan, so UK Special Representative for Afghanistan until 2002. So a very distinguished career, I think also with different roles within the British diplomatic service, before then switching to the European Union level. And that started in 2002, where Robert became the Director General for External and Politico-Military Affairs in the Council Secretariat, so the General Secretariat of the Council of the European Union, where he mostly supported the High Representative Javier Solana, so the first High Representative there to really make the CFSP work. And I think for most of us, he's also very familiar as the author of the first European security strategy, so the one document from 2003, that in the end was also meant to give a new strategic direction to European foreign policy. After that, I'm sure we'll hear more about that. Of course, interesting years, also in 2009, when he joined the steering committee to set up the European External Action Service. So I think one of the institutions that many of us nowadays take very much for granted, but I'm also really looking forward to hear a bit more about the impressions of how this worked out. Then in 2010, he became special advisor to the Vice President of the Commission, High Representative Catherine Ashton, and then he also had a special focus on Myanmar. So as you can see, a long diplomatic career. And I'm really very pleased, Robert, that you agreed to join us, because I think what you can give us is the practice perspective, but also helped us to put events into a wider perspective, also in what they mean in terms of long-term development. So without further ado, I'm really looking forward to handing over to our keynote speaker, Robert Cooper, who will talk about the development of EU foreign policy and the liberal order.
Yeah, I'm not going to say much about the liberal order, because you I'm not going to say that much on the liberal order, because as I say, all that. But we can, if you want to talk about that, we can talk about that. But so I thought I'd actually talk about really what happened as I saw it happen in the way in which the EU developed over this period. My history with the EU actually goes back a bit before I joined, before I went to Brussels and became an EU official, because I was, and I don't know if the terminology is still used these days, I was the European correspondent in the days of EPC from, I don't know when it was about 1979, around that time. And then later on, I was I was European correspondent at that time. And then I did another job in the EU area, and then at some point in the 1980s, I was in Brussels in the UK representation, negotiating the accession when Spain and Portugal joined, which is actually a good way to learn about the EU, because you kind of have to learn a little bit about fish and a little bit about bananas, all of these things. And then the rest is, and then you know the rest. So I guess talk a little bit about how things, what happened over this period, roughly speaking. The starting point for me in understanding the EU and foreign policy is that the EU institutions were not designed for foreign policy. Actually, they were designed to abolish foreign policy in the traditional European mold, for foreign policy that functioned so well up until 1914, when something went badly wrong. And that was what, and then again had misfunctioned in the interwar years. They were designed to get rid of that. So in that sense, they were not designed. They were designed to create an entirely new set of relationships among European countries, and they've been, I think, one of the great successes of history in doing that. The second way in which they were not designed for foreign policy is that these are the EU institutions. It has a different, it has what you might describe as a legal bureaucratic culture. What does the EU actually produce? It produces laws. And who runs it? Answer a whole bunch of lawyers. And the objective of all of this is to do that. Henry Kissinger says, the spirit of policy, and what he means by that is foreign policy. This, by the way, is from Henry Kissinger's best book, which is A World Restored. It's his kind of PhD thesis. PhD thesis is often the best things people do in that life. Kissinger says the spirit of policy, meaning foreign policy, and that of bureaucracy are diametrically opposed. Bureaucracy longs for the safe, the familiar, and if possible, the routine. Policy, maybe foreign policy, has to be creative, based on intuition and conjecture. Now, you can overdo that. It's a bit romantic. He's picturing himself as the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, taking decisions here, there, everywhere, moving armies around, and so on, doing it on the basis of intuition. But he actually has a point, because actually foreign policy does require and particularly what it requires is to be really good. You have to have somehow a sense of how the times are moving, what you can get away with, what's acceptable, what's coming next. It's about the future. It's not about the past, which is what bureaucracy is about. And I just pause for a second here to say, if you think now about foreign policy in Europe, if we look back at the past, you ask who are the great statesmen. The names you think of are mostly people who did foreign policy. It's Metternich, it's Maurer, it's Castlereagh. Occasionally, just occasionally, you get a Colbert, somebody who did finance, but mostly it was the people who were in charge of foreign policy, who were the big names of the past. And the foreign ministry was the most prestigious ministry because it was on that the security of the state depended. Now think back to the post-war period. Actually, I'm not sure I know the names of very many of the current European foreign ministers. And if you look back in the post-war period, there are just one or two names that stand out, like Anthony Eden stands out, unhappily for the great mess he made as Prime Minister of Suez, although he actually did one very good thing when he was Foreign Minister. But in the post-war period, most of the European countries, what foreign ministers have done is they've been tidying up after decolonization. That's certainly how it seems to be in the UK. Or they've been working with the USA, with NATO in the Cold War framework. And that's the reason why, on the one hand, you've got the EU, which has transformed relations among European countries, and then for the wider world, that was the Cold War, and that's being run by the USA with NATO as the main force. Well, that's a simplified version. However, the work in the European Union of bringing the European states together in a new sort of relationship had an impact on foreign policy, because at the sort of beginning of the 1970s, after that's what, kind of 15 years or so after the Treaty of Rome, they're saying to each other, you know, we're all friends now. Actually, we ought to collaborate on foreign policy because collectively we'll have more weight than we do. And out of that came became European Political Cooperation. Maybe it's significant that that happens after the great bit of the great difficulty in European foreign policy has been half solved, which is Brandt and Ostpolitik. And I think that sort of settled Europe down. Germany still had, important leftover issues, but nevertheless, I think that was also a very significant moment. So that and the enlargement of the EU and the disappearance of General de Gaulle and all of those things meant that foreign policy cooperation then started. And one should remember that that was done on the basis of, well, the important thing to understand is that there was no executive. There was a rotating presidency, and insofar as there was any executive, it was a rotating secretariat. So every 6 months, you found yourself with a new chair, but not only that, you found yourself with a new tiny bureaucracy running this thing. So I think looking back, it's not a surprise that it didn't achieve a great deal. I was there actually when they did the Venice Declaration, very nice declaration. It shook people up a little bit. Did it make anything happen? No, not really. It sort of stuck a flag in the territory, but was it possible to turn this into policy? Not really, because there wasn't anything. If you couldn't get every national foreign ministry to operate in the same way. The only place where I think Europe did make a sort of a lasting mark, did make a difference, that's the EU, was at Helsinki, in the Helsinki negotiations, where the US was half absent because Kissinger regarded all of this stuff about cooperation, particularly about human rights, and all of that, regarded this as being sentimental nonsense, and didn't bother with it. And so the US delegation was instructed not to bother. And the EU was very good at operating in this large conference environment, because the EU itself was a permanent conference negotiating among itself. So operating in the Helsinki conference actually worked very well for the EU. If you can make a compromise among the EU member states, maybe you can do it in this wider forum. And that, I think, was probably the EU contribution, actually, quite a big contribution in getting the outcome basket free. Was probably the biggest contribution that EPC made. And so things carry on like that until 1989. And then the Cold War ends, and shortly after, the Balkan Wars begin. Partly as a result of the Cold War ending. I should say that the EU had a policy on Yugoslavia under the heading of Mediterranean Working Group, had a policy on Yugoslavia until then. And the policy consisted of giving it money. They had visa liberalization with Yugoslavia. It was kind of a policy of being nice to Tito because Yugoslavia was distancing itself from the Eastern Bloc, and this should be somehow sort of rewarded and encouraged. And so large amounts of money. What I remember about that, I wasn't deeply involved, what I remember was that there were continual arguments about how much we could take in the way of baby beef from Yugoslavia, because they kept trying to export this to us. And what about the sour cherries? They were a big problem because this was a product grown in Helmut Kohl's constituency in Rhineland-Pfalz. They were very competitive. But this was kind of standard EU policy. I have a suspicion, I don't know, if someone wants a research project, it's a great idea for you. I have a suspicion that the EU gave lots of money to projects which enabled the breakup of Yugoslavia. I think you'll find that the different states got them to finance oil refineries and this, that, and the other, so that when the moment came, they could exist independently. I can't prove I think that's true. What was true was that the EU was doing this in a, I think, a pretty much politically blind method. This was a commission delegation whose skill was in handing out money and getting the sort of things audit-proof and in being nice to Yugoslavia, and I don't think that they did that much in the way of political reporting or political thinking about what was happening in the the Yugoslav wars, there are two famous sentences that kind of lead you in, they come in any discussion of the post-Yugoslavia wars. The first was the statement by, they were complementary in a way. The first was the statement by James Baker, we don't have a dog in that fight. And the second was the statement by the then rotating president of the council, Jacques Proust, already muttering the name. This is the dawn of the hour of Europe. Well, it turned out not to be the dawn of the hour of Europe, or not in a very good sense anyway, because we made a fantastic mess of it. And it showed how impossible it was to do serious collective decision-making on a serious subject like this in the ramshackle methods that operated at the time. Decisions were made by ministers at lunch, sitting around a table. Maybe the microphones aren't very good. There's definitely no interpretation. It's all done in either English or French. And not everybody necessarily understood everything. But it wasn't just that bit that was ramshackle. Nobody discussed this subject. There was no policy on it except for the old policy of being nice to Tito. And my perception, and I don't think anybody has written a really serious study on this, another suggestion. But the papers haven't yet come out either, the documents. My perception is that the three large countries all reacted in very different ways. France, maybe it's unfair on them, but I think there's a sort of gut feeling about, well, Serbia was our ally in World War I. I think that's quite deep in the French view of Yugoslavia. Germany was really torn. This is really horrible, they're saying on the one side. And actually, I think in terms of understanding what was actually happening on the ground, the Germans probably were as good as anybody, maybe better. Their analysis of actually who the bastards were was probably as good as anybody. But could they intervene? No, they couldn't. They never sent troops abroad anywhere. Much less were they going to send troops to a place where they'd been however many years ago it was before. British, I find it a little bit hard to understand our reaction, but I sort of think that our Secretary of State at the time, as it began with Douglas Hurd, very decent, very sensible person, he'd been Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and I think probably he thought, well, this looks like Northern Ireland, only quite a lot worse, quite a lot dangerous, and let's keep out of that. Actually, that proved not possible to keep out because of the pressure of public opinion, and so we all got involved in the UN. I won't give you the whole story. It's a story which nobody has yet written properly, but I'll signal two or three key moments. We, at least in London, we had said we ought not to recognize Slovenia, because if we recognize Slovenia, we'll have to recognize Croatia. If we recognize Croatia, what the hell are we going to do with Bosnia and Herzegovina? So let's keep cool and not do anything until we see an overall solution. The British contribution to this was we sent Lord Carrington off to try and run a negotiation. And he's a clever, sensible, serious person, but it was extremely difficult. But Lord Carrington took a little bit the sort of view that I've described, and he said, in fact, he got the council to make a commitment in, I think, December '91, in which the ministers all agreed that the recognition of the independence of any of the republics can only be envisaged in the context of an overall settlement. I think that was an extremely sensible thing for people to agree. It was therefore a disappointment that in January '92, the Council recognized Croatia and Slovenia. Exactly how that happened, I can't tell you. I don't know. I do remember saying to the then European correspondent when he came back from the meeting, well, now you've got blood on your hands. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't have happened anyway, because it was already getting quite nasty. I won't give you all of the details, but they're really awful. If you go back to them, you find towns you've never heard of, which are kind of under siege and under threat. But I'll mention two of the key members. First of all, of course, the Srebrenica, which was a shame for Europe and for the UN. And at that point, people started saying, well, we will call the NATO bombers in. The next thing that happened was that UN peacekeepers, including British and French UN peacekeepers, were taken hostage and chained to bridges so that nobody could bomb. Well, that's another national humiliation. And it's around that point. This is I think early '95, spring of '95. By this time, by the way, Lord Carrington was replaced by David Owen, and then Carl Bildt replaced David Owen, took on a slightly wider role and was actually more present on the ground, which I think was a good thing. But what Britain and France and Netherlands then did was we then made a deal with New York that we were going to supply the peacekeeping force there with artillery, and the decisions to use it were going to be taken on the ground in the former Yugoslavia, not in New York. In the middle of '95, when there was yet another attack on the market in Sarajevo, deliberately, as one could guess, deliberately aimed to produce as many civilian casualties as possible, the UN force responded with artillery, which is relatively unusual for UN force, and it turned out to be very effective. There was some NATO bombing as well, which was very useful, but it was actually more useful in terms of political signal that NATO and the US are behind this as well. Actually, the damage was done by artillery. In those days, they didn't have precision bombing, whereas guns stay in the same place, and you can hit what you want within 3 meters. And after that, and I should say that by that time, Richard Holbrooke was there on the ground, and it's roughly after that that the NATO negotiations begin. So this actually is, far from being the dawn of the Arab Europe, this was the decade of humiliation for Europe. We proved ourselves incompetent at reaching a consensus on how to go forward, incompetent at executing the consensus, incompetent in terms of what we did on the ground. I should mention that early on, and I think actually the Council deserves some credit for it, when Lord Carrington was operating, he sent in monitors. They were known as the ice cream men, because they wore all white uniforms. actually local people felt safer when they were around, so they weren't totally useless. This was done on nothing. There was no budget for this in the EU. There was no committee to decide it. There was no, what's it called, the Balkans Committee? COWEB. There was no COWEB. This was all done through ULEX. Where they took the money, which budget they took the money from, I don't know, but I bet it was illegal. So I actually quite admire the people in Brussels who were trying desperately to make a system work which was designed for Helen farmers when they could plant carrots. So anyway, and then the kind of final humiliation of this is actually then the Americans move in and take it over and make the thing work. It wasn't all Richard Holbrooke. I think the impression given by his book is maybe a little bit exaggerated. I think that he personally, I think he deserved the Nobel Peace Prize, but I think there were quite a lot of other people involved as well, including some of the EU countries, and Carl Bildt too. Carl Bildt was particularly important because Carl Bildt represented the prospect eventually of the EU enlarging to the Balkans. And the remarkable thing about the story of this really dramatic, and I lived through this, really dramatic failure in the 90s is at the same time there was a dramatic success going on in the 90s, which was the negotiations to enlarge the EU. Now, nothing ever goes perfectly smoothly forever, but I can remember around the time we were discussing Iraq with the Americans in the early 2000s, and they're talking about regime change. And I was saying, actually, no, that's what the EU does in Europe. Well, maybe that's not the right way to put it when I'm sitting in Poland, but actually there was a transformation going on in Europe and enlargement was part of that. And it's out of that it's out of this this decade of disaster in the Balkans that the new institutions come. First of all, the San Malo Agreement, the British-French thing, which talks about the EU creating a force that can do peacekeeping and that sort of stuff when America's not available. That's 98. 99, Solana is appointed. Actually, the treaties don't say anything about a High Representative, so they appoint him Secretary General of the Council, and then pass the Secretary General job on to his deputy. Then in Helsinki they create the headline goal target for EU force development, and they create the military committee and the military staff in Brussels, all of which in European EU terms actually it's revolutionary. By the way, there's another sort of slightly smaller humiliation going on at the same time, which is Kosovo, which is basically, maybe I'm exaggerating, but that's basically an American idea. It's bad little, right? Maybe it's a good idea, I don't know, right? But it was driven by the USA. Somebody quoted Madeleine Albright somewhere as saying, well, our objective was to get the war started and the EU locked into it. These are the kind of things that people say casually, but that may be the way they saw it. And then there was a non-humiliation because Javier had just been appointed as High Rep, and we could begin to smell that there might be trouble coming in Macedonia. And he was sent off to negotiate in Macedonia. By complete accident, the UK was also worrying about Macedonia and got NATO to send a tiny force into Macedonia as a kind of promise that if sovereignty be on your own. Now, I know about that because actually I was the chairman of the Balkans Committee, and I kept asking them, one, is there going to be a war? Two, are we going to end up being involved? Like everyone knew the answer to both of those two. So three, can we do anything? We did these two things completely independent. It was one of the best bits of NATO-EU cooperation that ever was. And George Robertson and Javier went together in negotiations, but neither of us knew that the other was going in. But there you are. And then, when I arrived myself personally to work for Javier, which was beginning of 2002, the landscape in the EU looks a bit funny because you've got a gigantic, highly professional Ministry of Trade, so to speak, the PD, whatever it is that does the trade negotiations, highly accomplished people, maybe some of the best negotiators, trade experts in the world. You've got a growing Ministry of Overseas Development with a very big aid budget. We have got the embryo of a Ministry of Defense in that we've got a military committee and a military staff. As for foreign ministry, there isn't anything that remotely resembles the foreign ministry. There are some commission delegations, but basically they're doing sort of trade and aid. And they're basically, their aid, they're technical experts. There's no political thing at all. That was the conclusion which was then reached by the Great Constitutional Convention. And the main result of that was what turns up in the Lisbon Treaty as the External Action Service. It got delayed because, as people sometimes do when they're too enthusiastic about Europe, they started talking about a constitution, and that turned people off. And if they called it something much more modern, like modest, like kind of technical adjustment to staffing in external relations or something, we probably would have had it much earlier. But then that's the foreign ministry which comes. And I think I'll say just one thing about the high rep in the foreign ministry. I think the high rep is a very important job. The fundamental purpose of the high rep, and I think actually of the EEAS as well, is to serve the Council by bringing the member states together. For most of the countries in the EU, they can only actually do something and achieve things in foreign affairs, apart from one or two little bilateral things, if we act together. And it's the job of the High Representative and I think the External Action Service to enable that and to make that happen. And then the High Rep has got a whole series of other difficult things, like you've got to make the Commission join in too. That takes some skill sometimes. And also, you actually need somebody who's got the kind of diplomatic ability that Javier Solana had, and that Catherine Ashton had, though she was at a disadvantage because she had no idea what she was supposed to do. Very well learned. But she learned, she turned out okay. But you need those kind of personality and personal skills. But above all, you need somebody who can win the confidence of the Council and be creatively imaginative about finding solutions that everybody can live with. And the last word on the EEAS, I think that the EEAS has an important role to play in this, and can do this. Because if you've got a good ambassador on the ground, and I was talking to a couple of people about something we did with Israel, had a very good ambassador there at the time, Austria. You checked it, wasn't it? Anyway, very good guy. He actually brought all of the member states on the ground together, and he even formed them into little working groups, one of them looking at water and another one looking at the Israeli border defenses and so on, so that they studied, they didn't just duplicate work, they all studied things seriously and produced collective value added. And he then got the PSC out for a very memorable visit to Israel, and took them to a very memorable interview with Netanyahu. So they all went back and agreed on some stuff that the Israelis didn't like at all have done. But if you've got active, creative, imaginative people on the ground who can again bring the member states together on the ground, that can make a tremendous difference. If you're, say, I don't know, if you're a Dutch diplomat or a Swedish diplomat, they've got very good foreign services in the Netherlands and Sweden. But I must say, I'd much rather be representing the EU than representing the Netherlands or Sweden. It's always, I mean, I'd rather be representing the EU than representing Britain. I have much more fun with it. You've got all these different people, and you get all these crazy ideas. You get a much broader. If you go to a meeting in Britain, I can tell you what everyone's going to say. One, they're going to say, we must handle this question case by case. That's the way they say, let's not actually have a policy. And then two, they'll say, we must consult the USA. You never go wrong saying those two things. In the EU, anything is possible. Much wider collection of ideas, much more fun. So there are some really good people. If we can get them onto the ground instead of people unloading their rubbish on the air, then they can really do a good job. And I apologize for the political scientist personality we really have. So there we go. That's where there's more I can say.
Thank you very much, Robert, for also, I think, painting a very colorful picture that shows this interaction of external events, personality, and also structure that is needed. But I think also to actually end on a positive note, that we often talk about staged and disagreement, but actually it can also be a colorful community that tries to work together. I'm very happy now that I have two discussants with me who will do our first reaction before we open the floor for questions and answers. And I will now hand over to Helene and Marina for a first reaction.
I think this
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So let me join Heidi in thanking you for speaking to us about these important issues and about your experience inside the system. We all spend our entire career studying this system, so it's a privilege to hear an insight like you talk about how you see things working. I'm going to ask 3 questions because I'm sure all of you want to raise issues as well, so I don't want to take up too much time. I'd like to start first, or remain first on the positive note on which you ended, that anything is possible in the European Union. And I think this links nicely onto a question that we as scholars often discuss and analyze and try to theorize about, which is, perhaps putting it the other way around, the EU sometimes does what seems impossible in foreign policy, in the sense that they manage to come to agreement on political issues when we should really expect that they wouldn't agree. So this is it's a classic question for scholars of political science. How do they manage to actually do that? And I see several people here in the audience who have written about that with regard to EU foreign policy. So I was quite fascinated of the comment that you had during the break, when you said that, well, it's very much about persuasion. So most of our theories in international relations claim that it's about something else, that it's about bargaining that involves threats and promises. So you seem to be launching a different and very interesting and promising account of how they managed to do the impossible. But you also said, if you are a small state, you need big diplomats. So what I wanted to ask is if you could say something about the balance then between power, large states, big resources, lots of competence and capabilities on the one hand, and this other thing going on in foreign policy, which seems to be about persuasion skills, the right kind of person to bring actors together. So how that balance works out, and perhaps you have some examples of particular cases where you observe that balance. So that would be my first question. My second question is more specific and linked to the EU of today, because as Heidi already said, you authored the security strategy of the European Union. We now have a global strategy as a follow-up to the security strategy. So I wanted to ask you if you would say a little bit about what you see are similarities and differences in the foreign policy course that is set in those two documents. How different are they really? As we've heard several times today, we all, as scholars, threw ourselves on the global strategy, as we also did with the security strategy, trying to figure out, so what's the key message? And of course, the ambiguous concept of principled pragmatism has been very much in focus, and there are different views of what it means. You don't need to get into that particular formulation, but really the broad sort of comparison between those two strategies, and in your view, how different and in what way is the global strategy compared to the text that we wrote? The last question I wanted to raise has to do with what you said at some point in the beginning of your presentation when you spoke about foreign policy being different from bureaucracy and politics regulated by law. So foreign policy being more intuitive, perhaps, being about having a sense, I think you said, of what will work, what is acceptable, and what is, where's the border of how you can do things. Now, I wanted to link this to electoral order and the crisis of the liberal order, if we can sort of agree on a general description as there is a certain crisis, or at least the liberal order is under pressure. Now, I wonder if you would agree that this crisis signals a change in what is feasible or acceptable at the global level in terms of foreign policy. Is it so that this crisis, which of course is also about the rise of new powers that want to sort of make their mark, so it's obviously about competition for power. But my question is if there is also a kind of normative thing or value thing going on in your view in the present crisis, so that it signals a change as to what is acceptable in terms of foreign policy, and whether or not that that change in terms of what is acceptable has to do with a stronger resistance to the ambiguities of the liberal order. The ambiguities, I'm thinking there of, on the one hand, the liberal order as an order that rests on the principle of the sovereign equality of states, which is the core principle of multilateral engagement, and at the same time the dependence of US hegemony for the function of the liberal order. So a kind of sense that, yes, there are some principles that we should accept in multilateralism, but also it actually works perhaps as an instrument or a tool for Western powers to maintain a specific kind of order. So would you agree that the present crisis then is linked to a change in the sense of whether or not these ambiguities are still acceptable or not? And if it's linked to that, what would be the implications for EU foreign policy, considering that the European Union has supported and promoted a liberal order? Does it need to sort of look inside itself and reconsider its strategy for promoting the liberal order?
Thank you very much, Helene. Maybe if you agree, we would first also take Ben, and then give back the floor to you. So Ben Tonra from University College Dublin, what is your take on European foreign policy development?
Okay, I'm going to be much more prosaic, because Helene's just smarter than me to start with, so I'm just going to be more prosaic about this. I start with a comment and then just two quick questions. The comment is, I mean, the wonder of hearing from Robert is just that sense of perspective, and to remind ourselves where we're coming from in terms of this construction, which in a sense is phenomenal. Robert gave a couple of vignettes as to sort of the early days of what it was like in the Foreign Secretariat. I always love to tell my students the stories of the Danish presidency, when the foreign ministers fly in for their political cooperation meeting, fly to Copenhagen for that, and then they all leave the meeting, they get into their cars, get into their jets, they then fly to Brussels to meet in the formation of the Council of Ministers. I mean, so paranoid with the member states about any infection from one system leading over to the other. And the other wonderful story, of course, is that when the EPC Secretariat was finally given a solid base in Brussels, in the Council building, but were put on a floor with a key in the elevator so that nobody could get off on the nobody else could get off on the floor that the EPC Secretariat was located in. So we've come a long way, baby, as they would say.
We wouldn't let the commission meeting.
There you go. I mean, and I distinctly remember in my very early days, believe it or not, as a PhD student during the Irish presidency, being asked to go to represent Ireland in a Track 3 meeting in Paris of the Euro-Asia dialogue, and I was going to be in the chair because Ireland had no officials, we didn't have enough officials, so we sent this PhD student to do this track 2 stuff. And I said, well, you know, where's the dossier, where are the briefing documents, you know, what do you want me to say, what are my priorities? And the person who had half of an Asia desk, because we didn't have an entire Asia desk, we get one person who half-time did Asia, the only instruction she gave me was, you are to hold the microphone and you are not to let the commission have the microphone. Now I knew sod all about Asia, so I sat here at the meeting holding the microphone for the commission woman to actually do the, again, just where we've come from. And Robert gives us a perspective of where we come from. Two really quick, but as I say, very, very prosaic and pedestrian questions. The first one is, why the hell is this so difficult? Why the hell? I mean, it's like the narcissism of small differences. These are small to medium-sized, wealthy, northern countries, some of which have a rich multicultural societies, you know, not a cigarette paper of difference in terms of values, in terms of interest, in any real substance, and yet we have this farce, this pantomime of 28 people around a table arguing about where the commas and the full stops will go in the declaration on Syria because, etc., etc. I mean, in a sense, and this is the question, why the hell is this so difficult? It shouldn't be. Second very prosaic and pedestrian question is, are we pursuing the wrong strategy? We seem to have collectively within the European Union this idea of the Westphalian ideal. We have an ersatz foreign minister. We have an ersatz foreign ministry. We're now building an ersatz European army. But are we doing something that, to take your first point, the European Union is congenitally, in its DNA, incapable of doing? So, would a different strategy be to build on the uniqueness, the speciality, the particularity of the European Union as a bureaucratic and legal actor, and just say to ourselves, we're not going to pursue this Westphalian model of having an army and a foreign ministry and a foreign minister and bestride the globe and going toe-to-toe with the Russians and the Chinese, because that's not who we can be in the kind of political entity that we've created for ourselves.
Can I answer first?
Thank you very much. I think 5 difficult enough questions to allow you now to take the floor.
I think I'll take them in reverse order. And if I may, I'll take them in reverse order, because I have Ben's last question really here. Because actually, there was a little bit at the end of what I was going to say, which is sort of my personal answer to that. I don't think that the EU is going to be a great power in the way in which certainly we're not going to be a great power like the USA. I have no ambition to be a great power like Russia, I don't think that's the kind of power we're going to be. And I think it's a bit. I think and this also is a little bit the answer on the question of the 2 strategies. If you ask what's new in the, I'm less interested in word principles, pragmatism or pragmatic principles or whatever, because this is just whatever you choose it to mean. I'm more interested in the phrase strategic autonomy, which I don't find a very realistic ambition for the EU at the moment. But I take that as a signal to say, well, 4 years of Trump will survive that. 8 years of Trump, that's going to be a bit awkward. Then suppose Ivanka comes in, maybe we'll actually need to be able to look after ourselves a bit more. And it's not a stupid thing, therefore, to put a bit more money into defense procurement. Not more money into it, but actually money into doing joint procurement, so we get better value for money. So I think for me, that's the most important bit of the strategy. I'm sure there are some other important bits as well, but actually it's that sense, maybe we're going to have to look after ourselves a little bit more. I hope not, because I think that what the USA has done, with 1 or 2 exceptions, has been absolutely fantastic. This is the made in America world, and it wouldn't have. There are all kinds of things. I mean, it's the way in which sort of Marshall and Atchison and Truman handled the first years of the post-war period is fantastic, and the backing that they gave. I thought that when the EU won the Nobel Prize, it should be regarded as kind of belated recognition for Monet, Schumann, and Atchison, because without American backing, it wouldn't have happened. So all of those things. So that I think is. I don't think we should aim to be a great power, but I think maybe it's right for the EU to worry a little bit about a post-American world. And hoping that it won't happen. The second thing that I think about is I'm afraid to say, and it's probably just because I was there at the time, I still believe in enlargement. It may take time, it may take a bit more imagination, a bit more creativity. I still believe in enlargement of the Balkans. Javier Solana used to say, and I agree with him, we can fail in the Middle East. Actually, we've done nothing else in the Middle East except fail. So we can carry on failing in the Middle East. We cannot fail in the Balkans if we're going to hold on. And I agree with that. It may take time. I think it takes a bit more imagination. I think it may take a bit more toughness as well. But I think that still ought to be a central aim. Personally, and I've kind of been there for the various Maidan events, I want Ukraine to be a member one day. Now that's quite a long way away, and there will be quite a lot of problems to solve in the end. But I think that the way in which the friend of mine used to say, the only way you can repay your debt to your parents is by paying it to your children. And I think the only way we can repay our debt to America is by spreading the reward. And I think the best way that we can do that in our sphere is through enlargement. Anyway, but not everyone agrees with me in the kind of presidential palaces and in the election. But that's what I think that ought to be a primary mission. Now, if you can do a little bit of good along the way, if we can sort of help Turkey move forward, I'm actually not against Turkey joining, but they've got to turn out to be a real European country at the same time. So I think we should do what we can in other places where we've done something, I think, useful in Somalia. I think that the mission in Chad was actually a good idea. Those things, if we can do those, that's fine. But that's not our main business. And climate change, I think, is going to be a very big priority, where the EU is going to have to play a very big role as there are in that way. So I think there is a role for the EU, but it's not traditional great power. That was my answer to your second question, a bit of my answer on the security strategy. I think I would put more climate change. By the way, for those who, there's a very good paper by from the EU, the EUIA, the SS, whatever it is, in Paris. A very good paper from Gal on the next sort of 20 years or something. Why is it so difficult? I think that's a question you can only answer, unfortunately, issue by issue. I mean, you look, for example, at Libya. You would have thought we all have the same interests in Libya. We do. It's just that the French support one military guy, and the Italians support another. I don't know how these things happen, but somebody else may know this better than I do. It's very hard work getting agreement, and sometimes you have to work hard, sometimes it comes easy, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. The more you have on the ground, you probably don't have anybody in Libya. The more that you have somebody on the ground in Libya who has real authority and is taken seriously, the more likely you are to be able to resolve those kind of things. That's why I believe in the EEAS, and believe that you should allow member states to dump their, they should give you their stars. I think if I was the High Rep, I would whisper to people, you give me somebody really good, I'll give you another good job after that. And to those that give more shall be given more. The trouble is that you don't always know, because there are some people who like cheese, are wonderful in the domestic surroundings and don't really function in a different environment. If you try it, you should try them out. Ought to be more possible somehow to find. I'll come back to the crisis of the liberal order at the end, because that sounds like a PhD thesis. How do you get people to agree impossible things? Well, we were talking a little bit in the break, and I was describing I once had a set of, this is another great project for someone, find 3 impossible things, and then you then have to go around and talk to people in confidence about how it happened. And the one that I was talking about, or one that I know it was, we got the EU to agree, you might call them more aggressive rules of engagement for Atalanta than NATO had. Specifically, our mission had the possibility of doing shore attacks. That is to say, not just dealing with pirates on the high seas, but getting on the beaches and burning their boats and destroying their equipment, which is the most effective way to deal with pirates. How was it done? Well, the person who happened to be running at the time in British Northwood headquarters talked to the PSC several times, understood that there was definitely going to be a problem about this in Dublin, and there was going to be another one in Berlin, and there was, and that he was going to have to work quite hard in Stockholm too. So he went around and talked to the Bundestag, and he went and saw everybody who was in Dublin, gave them all the assurances that if they found themselves in a situation that looked like it was going to require violence, they were going to get off the beach straight away, and so on. And persuaded everybody that he was serious about doing this in a sort of clean way that was going to solve problems, not create them. And you can do that, and that's what I mean by persuading. And I saw in the 1 or 2 people in the list of EU special representatives are very capable of persuading anybody of anything. I won't give their names, because I think it's unfair. But the 1 or 2 people who are actually simply superb, because they know their area and they know what you can do, what you get away with, and they've got an authentic understanding of people. It's called diplomacy. And the liberal order. This is a big question. I don't have great answers. I think that a lot of the origins of this are domestic and particular in different countries. I think maybe there's a specific problem in Central Europe, new democracies, particularly kind of force-fed democracies, kind of fertilizer dumped on them in gigantic quantities to make the democracy grow and so on. I don't think that's very easy. I think democracy is difficult, and that people spend a long time learning how to do it properly. Actually, even people who've been doing it for a long time, like my country, do it extraordinarily bad. And the populism in my country, comes from a whole series of factors. That's the easiest case for me to describe. One of the factors that could be that we could do a lot about is inequality. Inequality has risen a lot in the past 30 or 40 years. I think the French Revolution got it right. Liberty, equality, fraternity. I don't think you get equality and fraternity, liberty and fraternity, unless you've got a decent degree of equality. And somehow that has to be redone in a sensible way. But I also think that as generations change, political legitimacy changes as well. And sometimes the ways in which our institutions work, I admire very much actually what Ireland has done, because you've had to look at your institutions in all kinds of ways and actually transformed your country's constitution. Well, it's about time that some other countries like mine did that too. Maybe we talk about this. I want to choose the House of Lords quite a lot think that actually would be a bit more in tune with the time. People don't feel represented by their representatives who elect them, because these tend to be kind of clever people. I think they feel more represented by ordinary people. And actually, ordinary people, which in the right setting, are very sensible. And I think that your citizens assembly. So anyway, those are just two things. But I think there's a background is an economic problem, but I think there's a political problem. Democracy doesn't last forever. It always needs to be rethought and reinvented.
Thank you very much. Looking at the time, we have a couple of minutes left, so we could take 2 or 3 questions. Again, as always, please identify yourself and try to keep it as concise as possible, and we can fit more in. Or comments, of course, too. Yeah, please.
My name is Clara Portela from the University of Valencia, and I have a brief question concerning what you just mentioned in your speak about Richard Holbrooke and how he actually made a great contribution to the resolution of the crisis, but at the same time this seems to have obscured the contribution made by a number of figures on the European side, particularly by Carl Bildt. And I couldn't help making a parallelism in my mind to what happened after the Iran nuclear deal, where Cathy Ashton and at the later stage also Mogherini, and actually starting with Solana, they have actually made a substantial contribution to the nuclear deal. But once this was concluded, we also Kerry on TV. So I was wondering whether, there is a problem in communicating successes, so to say, because I mean we keep hearing about failures of European foreign policy. They are all over the place, so there's no shortage of communication about foreign policy failures. So I would have expected the EU to actually be very public about the fact that something that had taken years to negotiate had ended up being a success. So who is getting things wrong? Is it CNN that has a tendency to focus on the US State Secretary, or is it the EU that hasn't managed to frame anything like a successful PR policy, or how can we explain this?
Thank you very much. I think we'll collect 2 questions, Mariana.
Yes. So, hi, my name is Mariana. I'm based in Oxford and soon to be UCD. Thank you so much for your contribution. I guess my question relates to what we discussed today, so how the EU relates to the changing world order, and in particular, how it relates to the BRICS. And in that sense, what you think about strategic partnerships and the documents or the agreements that the EU sets up with the strategic partners, and to what extent do you think those are useful, and to what extent do you think that EU really has a strategy in the way it selects its strategic partners, and particular with respect to BRICS? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Robert?
My name is Robert Kizik from the Barcelona Institute of International Studies. Very briefly, I want to link together 3 things that you said at different times in your speech, which seem to be, I don't know how they fit together. So maybe the first was what you mentioned in the 1990s. You said that one of the successes of the period was the enlargement negotiations. And you referred to the transformation of Europe, and you said that the EU did regime change and that that was something good. You later said that you believed in enlargement and that the Balkans, we needed more toughness. And then just very, almost last comment, you said that Central Europe, and I presume you meant those member states who are Central and Eastern European countries, required a bucket load of help or fertilizer, I think you said, and that democracy doesn't last forever. I know the director of Open Society Europe in Barcelona, and they do polling specifically to help. It's private information on the opinions of people in Poland and in Hungary and other Eastern European countries about human rights, about all sorts of issues that they, in their work supporting civil society organizations, are funding. And the things which he cannot say in public, but he can say, are shocking. And his argument is very simple, that none of these values stuck, and that there is no embedding of these values, and that enlargement in that sense is not transferred. So I wonder which of your positions you would reflect upon as being the one that, was it really a success, or was it perhaps really regime change? And we know regime change often doesn't work.
That's Iran, BRICS, and Central and Eastern Europe.
Well, I start with you at the end because that's the one that's in my head at the moment. I don't know the answer. You'd have to know these countries much better than I do. There's a lot of Polish people around here. They can give us the answer. I'm sorry if I sounded disrespectful. Actually, I mean, I think that democracy is an extremely difficult thing to do, because you've got these kind of contradictions. You've got to have this kind of balance between conflict and unity. And you've got all kinds of technical things which turn out to be quite important, like the way in which the kind of electoral system you choose and the institutions. And the trouble is, once you've got the institution, it's quite difficult to change them because they like it the way there is, because that's how they got there, and so on. So I don't think any of this stuff is easy. I think that there are some, and I think everybody has difficulties. You know, as I say, the UK used to be thought of as a model democracy, and now it turns out to be total rubbish. So if I was disrespectful, I'm sorry about that, but I'm even more disrespectful about us. As for the Balkans, I think it can be done. I think that we should expect there to be ups and downs, but I think that we should be honest. I don't think that we should, and I know I'm on safe ground with Nicola, I don't think we should pretend that Serbia is a great democracy at the moment. I think that we should give Macedonia a real chance now, because I must say I think that Zaev has been very courageous. I think Macedonia's got its faults as well, particularly in the Albanian part of the constitution. But nevertheless, I think we ought to try and do our best for all of these people. That I still think is the great European project, to spread the liberal values. Liberal values means not forcing, not compelling people, not coercing. They have to make the choice themselves. I don't have an answer to the question, but all I can say is that I still believe in it. It was, Mariana asked about EU and strategic partnership. One of my sort of personal rules is, whenever you see something called strategic, ask yourself, is this garbage or not? How different is a strategic partnership from a partnership, or is it? So I'm pretty skeptical actually about this. BRICS, that's Brazil. Brazil's having its troubles at the moment. Russia, well, it's great. India. These are fascinating people, but my God, they're difficult to deal with. And China, well, there we are. It's a little bit of flattery calling these things strategic partnership. I think that one should give them all a try and see which one works, and if it works, then do more of it. But I don't think I believe that strongly in those things. You sometimes find that you have, sometimes you actually try it all and see. At the moment, if you ask what's looking like it's blossoming, I would say EU-Japan relations, because Japan feels a bit insecure, and it's going quite well with Korea as well. So I think, one should make friends with whoever you can find who's really interested in it, and particularly those who do share your values or your aspirations. And these are interesting places. I'm happy to see the EU getting itself a little bit more involved in Asia. Claire's question on Iran is, and generally on who gets the credit for these things, I think it's very good. I think Javier Solana deserves credit for lots of things. I think he actually deserves lots of credit for things that he failed on, like the Middle East. He tried fantastically hard and was extraordinarily skillful. And that's true of Catherine Ashton as well, too. Actually, there was a time when she was the only person in Egypt who was talking both to Sisi and, what's his name, Morsi. She was the only person who was actually talking to both of them. And John Kerry sent an instruction to the American embassy in Egypt saying, you do whatever Catherine Ashton tells you. So even when you fail, you can sometimes fail in a spectacular fashion that reflects great credit on you. I think Javier did extremely well in starting the Iran negotiations, and we had to. Then came at the end of this was this really barren period because we started off with Zarif, and Rouhani was the person behind it. And that was great, except that they were cheating. That was just kind of what they do in Iran. And then we switched over to Larijani, who was fantastically entertaining. At dinner, I'll tell you the joke that Larijani told us when we began the negotiations with him in Vienna. And then they switched to, what's his name? He was Ahmadinejad's man, not Larijani. I've forgotten his name. But anyway, negotiating with him was like negotiating with a block of wood. He was, in a way, a decent man, just couldn't get anything. And then, and I'd gone by that time, Rouhani won the election. I sent a text message to Kathy saying, wow, now you've got negotiations coming. And then he appointed Zarif as foreign minister, and I sent another text message saying, now you've won the jackpot. Then you had real partners. So, it's a bit of luck which time you get. I think, in a way, the real hard work in the negotiation was actually done in the Ashton phase. It wasn't just Kathy, there were other people backing her up. Helga Schmidt did a lot as well. And the member states, mostly at political director level, did it. When it came to, and they supplied sometimes invaluable ideas and sometimes intelligence and things like that. When the deal was done, the foreign ministers rushed out with a photograph. That's okay. If that makes them happy, it's okay. Provided you people understand who it was done and the insiders know. But in a way, the success of the EU was the two bits of success. The real success of the EU was getting the USA on board. And as well as, I think, if I say my first priority of the EU in the long term is enlargement, pushing it out, spreading the liberal in our area. My second priority for the EU, maybe it ought to be the first priority, is stopping the USA from doing really, really stupid things. And we ought to, I sometimes think, but that's when I'm too optimistic, I sometimes think we might have stopped them doing Iraq if Britain had got together with France and Germany and managed to produce a consensus to say, look, we'll do this if you let the IAEA crawl over the whole place and tell us whether there are WMD there. If they prove there are, then we'll go with you. Otherwise, we're not going to do it. I think maybe we could have done that. That's probably a bit optimistic because they were going crazy in the USA. But the second thing we should have done was we should have stopped. This is in NATO. We should have stopped the USA proposing Ukraine and Georgia for membership of NATO. That's absurd. And actually, this was George W. Bush in 2008. This is Davis. I mean, Rice and Gates were both against it, and all it needed was for Germany was against, France was hesitant. If my country had woken up and said, "You must be crazy. We're going to move NATO up to the Russian border. We haven't yet even discussed this with the Russians. This is completely a criminal irresponsibility. We let them do that." So the only thing we've done right in that respect was Iran. But I think that the other sort of duty on maybe the first or the second priority for the EU ought to be to watch the USA like a hawk and make sure they don't get us into real trouble. Coming back to the question of who gets the credit for it, I actually think that Javier deserves more credit than I think anybody's ever given him for the Macedonian negotiation as well. When you've got a negotiation, you can't kind of go around claiming success because you want to say it's the people who've done it. You want to give the credit to the Iranians in this case. And maybe it's a bit irritating, but the people who know about this, I think, know it well now. There's a slight problem in EU foreign policy in that you've got a whole lot of national foreign ministers whose job is to claim credit for things. But again, one ought to try and allow them to do this because they all contribute as well. I thought that the Iran method wasn't bad. Actually having the three, Britain, France and Germany there was very important. And they started it in any case. But I think it was very good that the EU was represented and therefore everybody was represented. And as far as I was concerned, while I'm not going to tell the whole story in the PSC, anybody who wanted to come and hear from me on a private basis what was going on, or to feed suggestions in, they could always do that. And I think that's, I think one ought to, Javier was there representing the whole of it. And I think that was a good thing. And that's so I think we ought to learn from those successes as well. But I'm less worried about the PR thing. I'm more interested in looking for ways of repeating it. But we ought also, but nevertheless, our publics need to understand that actually this EU now and then does something good.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we could go on discussing uniform policy for another few hours. But I think I hope one thing that we all agree on, that it was a successful last 2 hours in showing how important it is and how inspiring it is to bring practitioners and academics together. And I really also hope it's just the beginning and we will continue to have these conversations also in the future. But for now, I would just ask you, please join me in thanking our two discussants and especially our keynote speakers.